Come on now. Hello, can anyone see me here? God damn it. Hello. Why isn't this showing up? God damn it. Hello. All right, I'm trying to figure out where I even am here. Can't seem to get the video up. That is not it, right? No, that's dead. So should show me streaming right now, shouldn't it? Oh, there we go. Okay. All right, guys. Listen, I'm going to ask you if you can, please. I'm sorry, there was a technical issue and it just my phone rebooted itself, I guess. Can you please share the link everywhere in your social media so people know where the correct address is? So people who were clicking the other link don't miss it. I am going to try to put in the video there of the previous one. I'm going to make it clear that that it was that it got canceled accidentally. Jesus Christ, how do I... No. Oh, that's the wrong one. All right. Can you please let everybody know about here, I'm going to just put it as a boast. Do this at least. God, I hate machines. Fucking hate them. so irritating. All right, give me one sec, guys. Sorry. That's all I can do. So please get the word out if you can. I would really appreciate it because I'm sure that there's a lot of people. Wait, can you guys hear me? I just saw someone said no audio. Oh, okay. So I guess it wasn't that. Okay. Somebody said posted no audio and suddenly I thought that you guys couldn't hear me. So again, please share the link to the new live stream area. I can't believe this. It's just so stupid. This is why I shouldn't be allowed to use machines on my own. All right. We'll give it a few minutes for more people to show up. Hopefully get news of this. Once we're somewhere past 50 viewers, then we'll do this. So it's up to you guys. Please share the word. Go on your, get on Twitter, get on Facebook groups that are RPG related. Get on the RPG site, someone, and put on the post. I did a thread. I would do it myself, but if I do, it'll probably kill the live stream again. So I don't know how to do that. So go to I did a thread on RPG site, Baptism of Fire AMA live stream. Please go there, someone, and tell them that the address was changed because I'm an idiot. Let's try to get things back on track here, but I don't want to start with where there might be people missing that. Damn it. All right, please keep getting the word out. There's got to be more people than this. I don't know what our numbers were at before the thing died, but let's give it a little while here. In any case, thank you all for coming on. Thank you all for finding this place, this post again. You know, finding this live stream again. I swear, you know, for a guy who spends all of his working hours in front of either a computer or a phone, I'm so useless with them. I'm Gen X, but when it comes to technology, I'm a fucking boomer. Let's see what you guys are saying. A lot of hellos and stuff. Adino the S Knight says Chris Miller's in the house, the mad genius behind Mad Scribe. Yes, and not only that, but he's also a very big part of the success of Baptism of Fire, because he is the publisher of Baptism of Fire, and he did all the art and the cover and the layout and all of that. And so I'm very glad he's here. Chris didn't write any of the text, but he did everything else. And I think that as much as my game writing is important, it wouldn't, like, I think that Baptism of Fire is the most successful product launch that I've ever had. Okay, but like by far, it's for 3 days straight now. It's been #1 on DrivethruRPG, #1 bestseller. It's killing it. It's beating Warhammer 40K. It's beating Fallout. It's beating Traveler. It's beating Cyberpunk. it's just flattening all of them, and I just can't believe that. But I am fairly convinced that none of that would have been possible without, for starters, the badass cover, and then for the rest of the previews showing the layout and the art. So Chris deserves like mad respect for his abilities as a publisher, and anyone would be lucky to have him. It is just crazy how much attention it's gotten and how well it's doing. It didn't just hit bestseller, it hit silver bestseller in under 24 hours, which is really pretty impressive. I mean, my better products, they would have, for example, I think that like Sword and Caravan hit copper bestseller within a couple of days, and then maybe a week until it was silver, and then, you know, now it's gold. But and Lion and Dragon was probably similar to that. So, but I've never had something go up 2 tiers of the best-selling list in a day, you know. Adino, thank you for updating the link at the RPG site. I am such a bozo. All right. Well, we're past 50, so that's when I said I would actually start. So, hello again. This is the RPG Pundit, the final boss and internet shitlords. And this is the special Ask Me Anything live stream for Baptism of Fire. My apologies to those of you who got disconnected from the first one. But now I'm here. And basically, we're going to talk about Baptism of Fire, obviously. And it is the #1 best-selling RPG on Drive-Thru right now, and has been for 3 days. So it's pretty amazing. I'm blown away by it. I couldn't believe how lucky that was. So I guess the I don't know, the place to start is thank you to everyone who has already purchased it. And if you haven't, well, you know, you're obviously missing something, because everybody is. So be sure to check it out. D&D Old Guard says, I'm ready to be baptized. All right. I'll mention to everyone here that this live stream isn't monetized, but if you want to share super chats, I do not only read comments that are super chats, because I know a lot of places do that. I read any comment I find interesting, but if you do a super chat, then I definitely will read your comment, unless it'll get me banned from YouTube or something like that. Okay. But aside from that, if you don't want to just do super chats, you can always pick up Baptism of Fire. That's one of the great ways to support me right now, as well as many of the other products that we have. Speaking of which, I wanted to point out that a couple of additional products that have come out just recently now. So in the first place, there is, oh geez, where is that? I wanted to bring to everyone's attention that I guess it was this. Today, today, this morning, we had the Pundit Files number 11 has just come out. You can get it only on the Red Room. It's historical authentic cities. And this is basically a guide for how to make cities in your settings look like more authentically real medieval cities. And it tells you about how cities were organized in the Middle Ages, law enforcement, guilds, church activities, markets, and all kinds of stuff like that. And then it has a number of tables that let you generate neighborhood by neighborhood a medieval city if you want to go that way, and guidelines as to where to put the main roads and water sources and all that sort of thing. So it's a pretty useful tool for world design or for location design, setting design, whatever you want to call it. And like all of the Pundit Files issues, it's only available at the Red Room store, and it only costs $3.50. Okay, so that's the first thing. Let me see what people are saying here. I want to try to keep up with the chat this time. Why do I have it on top chat? It always does that. All right, so I don't want to miss stuff. All right, a lot of hellos. Oh, the James Gang, $10. One of us, he says. Okay, one of us, one of us. I'm not sure what that's referring to, but all right. A lot of people saying they bought the PDF. That's nice. Some of them are waiting for the physical copy. MLF Bref says, call me old-fashioned, but I'm waiting for my physical copy of Baptism of Fire before even reading it, even though I got the PDF. That's nice. Jeff Ramdekar says, buying Baptism as I watch this. Scrooge McDuck says, ordered the hardback. Now just got to wait for DTRPG to print it. Thank you to all of you guys, to everyone who's bought Baptism of Fire. It's been really amazing. I've been swamped these last 3 days with all of the response to it, Old Guard has strong opinions on Modifius's Fallout. That doesn't surprise me. Chris Miller, thanks all of you guys. F2P Coder asks, okay, here's a question about Baptism of Fire. He says, any Slavic mythology in it? Yes. There's an entire section in the game that is of it's the whole collection. Trying to get my bookmarks here. Where the hell are the bookmarks? Oh, no wonder, wrong tab. Okay. So there's an entire collection about basically paganism and pagan places, pagan objects. There's a section about the gods that covers all of the kind of major Slavic deities that were active in Poland, right? Principally, although it also talks a lot about some of the gods of the Valeti and and a lot of these were similar, but just with slightly different names in other places. And so it tells you what those gods were all about. And then, of course, there's stuff about pagan magicians and how there were different pagan shamans, magicians, monster hunters, and all these sort of things that were devout to specific deities, so that NPC, or in theory PC if you want to allow it, characters who are pagan priests or shamans or witches will get specific special abilities depending on what their chief deity is. So all of that is there in the game. Pagans in the setting. The setting kind of presumes, the default game presumes that you're playing Christian characters. However, you could play pagan characters, and you could play a pagan campaign if you really wanted to, in the, just by kind of reversing the scenario that you're, Slavic pagans opposed to the Piast crown. And you'd have all the, pretty much all the material that was necessary would be there for it. The James Gang goes, so when shall we expect your baptism and conversion to Christ? All right, well, first of all, historically, I was baptized. I'm from a Polish family. It's pretty much impossible I wouldn't have been. As a child, of course, that's a baby. As for my own religious views, first of all, there's nothing in Baptism of Fire that is a direct, let's say, reflection of. It's not religious propaganda, right? This isn't me making some kind of a modern day commentary or anything like that, right? Like, none of my RPGs do that. They're all meant to really try to reflect what the world was like in that historic period. That said, although I'm presenting both the pagans and the Christians in a way that I try to be as authentic and direct as possible, I can say that it's very obvious why, and I talk about this in the book even, about why Christianity had so much appeal, right? Why it had appeal to the ruling classes, why it had appeal to the lower classes. There was, like it or not, Christianity just offered a better deal for everybody, and as far as I'm concerned, it's I'm kind of an expert on the topic of religion and comparative religion and religious studies, and among that, definitely the study of Christianity. My own personal beliefs are such that I'm pretty sure any Christian most Christians would probably not consider me a Christian, right? But I mean, I am certainly a believer in there being a true and living God Most High. Let's put it that way, and that I believe that that there's an enormous moral value to all religion, but that specifically Christianity has some very particular characteristics to it that make it especially significant, and that it is the absence of Christianity, or the abolishment of Christianity in our postmodern culture, that is the cause of a lot of the problems in our civilization. All right, I guess that's all I want to say about religion for the moment. If people have further questions, maybe I'll answer, maybe I won't. We'll see. Eric says, how does it relate to Lion and Dragon? Are both needed? No, Eric, that's a very good question. So Lion and Dragon is a set of rules, is a rule book that allows you to play medieval authentic games, and the settings like Dark Albion or Sword and Caravan. Dark Albion and Sword and Caravan are settings. They only have the setting material in it. You need to use either Lion Dragon or some other RPG to play it. But Baptism of Fire I made as a combination. It is both a complete setting guide and a complete rule book. Now, the rules of Baptism of Fire are essentially Lion and Dragon Expanded Edition. Some of the stuff has changed, obviously. Some of the classes have changed because of the difference in the setting. And then there's a lot of expanded material that has been brought into the rules from like the old school Companion 1, which was a kind of rules expansion of Lion and Dragon. And there are a couple of new changes, but there aren't basically it's the same game and it's completely compatible. The most significant change there, because other stuff, it's just added stuff. Like I expanded a little bit some of the injury section and the grappling rules, and I'm using the critical tables from Old School Companion 1, which are more detailed. They're crit tables by damage type. But the most significant change is that I got rid of the cleric, because the cleric was the least medieval authentic thing in Lion and Dragon. It was basically there just because D&D has clerics and I want to have the 4 core classes. But I have now gotten rid of the cleric and replaced it with 2 different religious classes. One is the holy man, who is basically like the missionary of the saint. He's this guy. He could be a priest, he could be a monk, he might be a lay person, but he's someone who is filled with the faith in God, and he can perform miracles, but he's not a fighter, right? He's not trained, at least, to be a fighter. He's meant to represent, especially in this period in PS Poland, you had these Christian missionaries that would go out to the land of the pagans and try to peacefully convert them. And a lot of them ended up getting themselves killed, of course. They were martyred and became saints. So that's the holy man, right? And on the other side, you have the holy warrior, which you also had in this period in Poland, of course, because they were, many of the warriors, the knights, you could call them, but they weren't really called knights at that point, that were around Mieszko I, were former pagans converted to Christianity, who then became fanatically devout about their faith. And so this is a class that is a fighting character that also has the possibility of performing religious miracles, usually about, the holy man is the one that goes around doing things like laying on hands and having visions and that sort of thing, whereas the holy warrior has miracles that strengthen his arms or help him to protect the innocent against pagans and monsters and things like that, innocent Christians, I mean. So that's the biggest change there. But on essentially the game system is still just Lion and Dragon, but there are new classes, there's new magic. Some magic from Lion and Dragon isn't there, like alchemy, because alchemy would have been so rare here that it wouldn't have made sense. But you can take alchemy from Lion and Dragon and use it in Baptism of Fire. And likewise, Baptism of Fire has some types of magic, like the runes and folk magic and spirit magic that you wouldn't have in Dark Albion, because those didn't really exist in the late medieval period anymore, or they were so rare that they wouldn't have been sensible, right? Maybe, I mean, folk magic would have been, but I didn't have it in the original rule set anyway. But again, you can translate those over. It's all totally compatible. John Edgar says, hello, Sir Pundit, just dropping by to hit the like and say hello. Thank you so much. Thank you for dropping by. Scrooge McDuck says, what's a medieval Polish dungeon crawl like? Well, look, I have to say that for the most part, Lion and Dragon and its settings, Dark Albion and Sword and Caravan, probably in actual play, I mean, they're all still OSR games, right? But in actual play, they might feel a bit more different from D&D than Baptism of Fire does. And I did a video about this a little while ago, that the thing is that even though Dungeons and Dragons has usually late medieval or even Renaissance type trappings, the essence of play in D&D, that thing of going into the dark cave to fight the monster, is something that is much closer to the early medieval paradigm. It's Beowulf, right? It's not Le Mort d'Arthur, which is what Dark Albion is, right? And it's not, 1001 Nights or something like that, which is what Sword and Caravan is, right? But the one that's closest to Beowulf is definitely Baptism of Fire, right? It's the pagan culture, the Christian culture hero going into the pagan lands. But the one kind of difference is that, there aren't a lot of dungeons in any of the 3 settings, but there are more of them in Sword and Caravan or Dark Albion than you get in Baptism of Fire for the simple reason that Poland doesn't really, it doesn't have a ruined civilization on it. There's no Romans or anything like that. So there's not going to be a lot of dungeons. What there will be are a lot of deep, dark forests, right? A lot of forbidding mountains, the Carpathians, swamps and dangerous riversides. And you will also have weird lands, weird areas, and also caves. Very clearly, there will be areas where there are caves with monsters in them. So it's sort of, I guess you could even say it's more like D&D primitive version. And you can definitely have adventuring where you have characters going into some deep caves, but I think that the central part of it is really more about like the dangerous wilderness environments, right? Don't forget the Carpathians are kind of the inspiration for like the Ravenloft and stuff like that, right? And when you check out what the monsters are like in this book, you can see just how many of them are really weird and creepy, or both, and very dangerous. So there's a lot of that kind of element of this being high risk play. My name says, just looking at our PDF copy, the full color hardcover hasn't arrived yet as I listen. Well, thank you for purchasing. Jay Smith says, just got paid today, gonna buy it now. Thank you. Yes, please buy it now. Chris Miller says, issue 5 of Mad Scribe is now available on Amazon. Awesome. Is that the one that has my article in it, or is that going to be number 6, Chris? Anyway, Jeff Adamo says that Pundit Files sounds just like what the doctor ordered. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. I think you're gonna find it's a pretty good product. A lot of someone else saying, my name says that sounds exciting. You can bet we're getting that Pundit Files. I should mention, right, one of the things that I discovered here, right, is that in the last 3 days, right, Baptism of Fire has done fantastically well. It's selling like crazy. But what I've also noticed is that some of my other books are selling like crazy. Spectre Press in particular, they're the only publisher that's done this with me, but it's cool, right, that they have. I get a notification every time a Spectre Press product of mine sells, right? So if it's the RPGPundit Presents issue, or the Old School Companions 1 or 2, or World of the Last Sun, or Gonzo Fantasy Companion, or Star Adventure. So I know whenever one of them sells, I get a message on, I get sent an email to my promotions section. And when Baptism of Fire went live and started selling like crazy, so did the other books, right? So did the Pundit Presents stuff and all of that. And so I'm guessing it's probably going to be similar to different degrees with, Lion and Dragon and Dark Albion. It's going to be similar with the Invisible College, and hopefully with the Pundit Files too, which is great. Martin Bowman says, were there Neoplatonic philosophers in Poland at the time? Well, probably not a lot, right? Like I said, like one of the reasons, for example, that some of the magic is different is because the kind of high magic, the top echelons of high magic requires highly educated people. And in Poland at this time, the only places where you could have found that level of education would have been in monasteries. And there weren't that many monasteries yet, but though there are by the time of the setting, right? Calvin Cambridge says, love Baptism of Fire, especially the new magic items and the shamanic magic system. All right, thank you. New Mode says, could you tell us about the classes? Yes, I think I could tell you a little bit about the classes. So in terms of the classes, we have, hang on, I'm going to do something crazy here. Oh, that did not work, whatever I was trying to do there. Oh, James Gang, $10 super chat. Thank you. Ordered Baptism Fire Deluxe Sword and Caravan bundle. I'm going to talk about that in a second. And researching Kievan Rus and maps east of Poland. I would censored for more Russian lore stuff and a map of Constantinople. All right. Well, I appreciate that. I will consider that. It's not out of the. It's not an impossibility. I am trying to give. Why did I do this? Why is it? I just can't seem to get what I want to do here with my promo. Okay, never mind. I'm just going to go to the classes and just try to read around because my phone is here and my screen is there. I'm going to have to try to read around my phone because it's just not letting me minimize this tab, which is really weird. Oh, hang on. I think I might have gotten it here. Ah, yes. All right. Did I mention I'm terrible at technology? Okay, so the classes. These are the following are the standard classes that you can play in Baptism of Fire. Number one is the Archer. Archers are typically of the lower classes, and they are a warrior. This is the class appeared originally, I believe, in the Old School Companion 1. And they're basically a warrior, but who specializes obviously in archery. Number two is the Fighter. The Fighter is basically identical to the one in Lion and Dragon. Number three, you have the Holy Man. So the Holy Man is, like I said, a priest, monk, or lay person who has taken on the task of trying to convert the heathens. They're not particularly good at combat, but depending on what of the three professions they are, they can start with a lot of skills, and they can have, like, obviously one of the big things is that in Christian areas they'll have huge social credit, so to speak, right? They're going to be super respected, particularly priests and monks, but a lay person who proves himself to show miraculous powers and holy behavior will probably do that as well. And they have the power to do miracles. Then there's the Holy Warrior, who is a Christian fighter pledged to God to spread Christianity and defeat the pagan enemies of the church. And true holy warriors can be blessed with miracles mostly in battle to protect the faithful or to defeat the enemies of the church. After that, you have the Skomrozni, which are a very interesting class. You see, I am not a fan of the D&D Bard class, and I would, they're principally because generally speaking, that Bard class is completely anachronistic. It makes no sense at all in any historical context, right? This idea that you have like a medieval musician who also does magic and can fight and is a thief, right? Of course, in the Middle Ages, the High Middle Ages and up, you had troubadours, right, which were wandering minstrels who could do music, and but that's it. They weren't magicians. They weren't inherently magical people. They may or may not have had a lot of lore. I don't know. But it wasn't the Bard class, and then even the word Bard is wrong, right? Because they're using Bard either in the ancient sense of like the second tier of Druid priesthood, which would not have existed by the Middle Ages, or they're using it in some much later sense, as in like Shakespeare as the Bard, right, or something like that. But it doesn't fit. It's not proper, right? So I never expected that I was going to have anything similar to a Bard class. And then as I began to work on Baptism of Fire, I started to do research on it. And to my surprise and chagrin, I found out about the Skomrozni. So in the pagan period and in the early Christian period of Poland, there were this class of wandering minstrels that were called Skomrozni, which means shameless. And they went around from place to place, making a living as musicians, singers, jugglers, storytellers, whatever. They were part from some very ancient tradition that was probably at one point something similar to the Celtic bards of the ancient pagan world. But by the time of Baptism of Fire, they're basically just entertainers and kind of shady ones. But they have these secret teachings. So they're known to be magical, kind of in the way that you have, like, in some parts of Europe, gypsies are thought to be magical, right? So I looked at this, I said, oh shit, well, this is a Bard class, and I decided to put it in there. And so the Skomrozni are You know, they have some they can have some thief abilities. They can have some magic. They have some lores of different kinds, and they play music, obviously. Then you have the thief class, which is identical to that of lion and dragon. And then there's the witch hunter. And the witch hunter is a class that is basically a warrior who has also studied occultism and magic and knows some magic tricks as well as fighting, and who are dedicated, who've devoted themselves to slaying monsters and fighting evil magicians, right? Basically, witches would be the main thing, because in the pagan world, you know, again, in the book, most pagans are presented in Baptism of Fire as being basically good people who venerate the gods of their fathers, right? And paganism, most of the gods are not particularly malignant in a direct sense. But there are also witches, right? And this is part of the pagan context of Polish Slavic paganism, that there were witches that were, you know, to the pagans themselves, there was witches that were dangerous and evil in that pagan world, right? Or that were, at least if not evil, sinister, right? That were potentially would harm people, and that would gather in dark places and do dark things, right? So you also had pagan monster hunters of different kinds that would fight them. And so like the witch hunter comes out of this what was originally a pagan tradition, but then I am being a little bit theoretical here in saying that given that this is the time of the Christianization of Poland, it would seem likely that there would be some Christians, Christian converts, or first generation Christian Poles who would have also dedicated themselves to fighting witches and monsters in a world where there was still this conflict going on between Christianity and paganism. Yeah. So the witch hunter is that class. He's a kind of fighter magician, right? Then you have the woodsman, which also comes out of one of the Pundit Presents issues. It's basically a guy who's highly competent, sort of a warrior, not entirely. You could think of it as a ranger with no magic, right, or something like that. But they're basically experts in maneuvering in wild places, which most people were not at this time. You know, in the medieval world, the wilderness was seen as incredibly dangerous, and only certain people who did this all their lives, hunters, poachers, trackers, you know, that sort of thing, would be the people that would go out and live in the wilderness and would consider that safe. Them and barbarians, of course. Which brings us to the last class, which are the Yodvingians. I wanted to obviously have a class that was like the tough guy barbarian sort of thing, right? In the same sense that I did the Scotsman and Lion and Dragon. This one is a bit less funny and a bit more credible, really, because the Yodvingians were a tribe of Slavs right at the edge between Poland, Lithuania, and Kiev, and the lands of the Rus. And they were known to all and sundry as the most violent and brutal people around, right? Like that's the reputation that they have held for all time there. They were incredibly tough, right? In Poland, you have different provinces, and the province most towards the east in the northern half is called Masovia, right? And the Masovians were in this period of time thought of as the toughest fighters in all of Poland, right? They were strong guys, but they were constantly freaked out about the Yodvingians, because the Yodvingians they were psychotically tough, and they were completely barbaric, right? Like you're talking Conan level stuff here, right? In fact, Conan's probably a lot more civil than they would have been. So this is to play a Yodvingian PC, or like brutal, tough warriors, dedicated pagans as a rule. However, I provide an opportunity to explain, like, because you could play him, he's as a pagan, but a Yodvingian who is traveling in Christian lands, it would mean that he had to have been either like an outlaw or a member of a clan that was exiled or destroyed, or a deserter, a coward, or something, some kind of renegade against his own people, right? Because his people were very united. The Yodvingians were very united. and they despise the Christian world. So if he's out in the Christian world, you have to have a reason for it. But there is another possibility, which is that in a 1009, one Yodvingian tribe led by a chief called Nedimer converted to Christianity as a response of the preaching of a holy man named Bruno, who had been a disciple of St. Adalbert. And 300 members of Nedimer's tribe converted. And then Nedimer's brother Zebedin rebelled and slaughtered Bruno and 24 of the converts, and the rest of them had to flee from the Yodvingian lands because they had converted. The other Yodvingians would have killed them all. So they eventually ended up in the court of Boleslav the Brave and brought Bruno's body with them. He was eventually canonized as Saint Bruno of Careford. And so a Yodvingian character could be one of those converts, one of the people that Saint Bruno converted. And anyways, the Yodvingians are your classic kind of barbarian guy. Lots of hit points, low saving throw. Good fighter, but not as good as the fighter, but he's a bigger tank, right? So those are the main classes, to which there's also one other class which appears not in the section on classes, but in the section in the back, the appendixes, which is the pagan magician class, which covers pagan priests, magicians, shamans, and witches, right? Which is an optional class that the DM can choose to allow if the game is, for example, a pagan campaign or a campaign where, for some reason, a pagan wizard would be tolerated among the group, which could happen because there were still places in this time period where Christians and pagans coexisted and in relative peace. And over time that becomes harder and harder, but there was a few areas where that happened. And they're detailed in the book. So Overkill Joe says, this book took off like a rocket, just shows how quickly a great book can get traction. Yep. My name says one of the classes is Skondrozny, yeah. Chris Miller says, it also shows people are starving for good settings instead of woke activist propaganda. Well, I hope that's a part of it, yeah. I think that the nature of the product is interesting to a lot of people. I think that the fact that it isn't, that they know it's not going to be woke crap is good. I think my track record obviously helps, as all the products I've done so far. But I also do think that the cover made a huge difference, because before the product went for sale, the cover came out, I'd never seen so much buzz about a cover for one of my products. And I think that a lot of my products have cool looking covers, right? Like I think Sword and Caravan has a very cool cover. I think Dark Albion and Lion and Dragon might be, depending, it might be my own opinion that my tastes are a bit medievalist. So, but I think that their covers are pretty cool. Invisible College's cover is cool for an occult book. But none of them ever got the buzz that Baptism of Fire has, just because it looks so heavy metal. And I think that a lot of gamers like that. And I'm hoping that they're going to be happy with that. That the game will reflect what they're looking for. F2P Coder says, will there be a supplement or setting focused solely on Slavic culture and reams of mythology in it? I have no issue in religion. I just want Slavic culture presented more. Well, I don't know, F2P, I don't know if you've already looked at the book. The book has a lot of information on Slavic culture and mythology and the monsters. It's all in the book. It's not just a rule book, right? It's a rule book and setting book. You have locations. You have a gazetteer that covers all of Poland at this time and talks about the cities and the places and the weird places and everything else, the trade routes, all of it. And you have a lot of material in there on the culture and mythology. So I think that it's already off to a good start. Could there be more? Yeah, there certainly could be more. I'm sure that I am going to be doing supplemental stuff. Some big, some small. Probably the first thing that's going to come out for in terms of a supplement is that a future issue of Pundit Presents is going to be Medieval City Guide Poznan, where I'm going to do a medieval guide. Like I've done other medieval city guides. I did one for York and for Exeter in not York, Hull. I did one for Hull and one for Exeter in the Pundit Presents series, so you can check those out. And so that gives you all the details of what that city would have been like in the 15th century. This is going to be a detail all about what Poznan is like in the 11th century. which includes, speaking of weird Wilderland places, the mysterious Oak Wood, which is just outside of Poznan. It was a major pagan site because it was really weird, right? It was really strange. It had these circular lakes that surrounded it, which we now know today are because of meteor strikes, right? This is all real. I'm not joking, right? And because of, presumably because of that, it was seen as somehow sacred to the gods. And also because in that wood there grow plants and certain animals like birds that cannot be found anywhere else in the region, right? And some of which are kind of unique. And those birds and those animals have unique properties, and of course the whole place is magical in the context of the game. So it'll be a guide to the city of Poznan and the Oakwood. My name says most Christians wouldn't consider me a Christian either. I believe in God. I don't believe in the church. How does that work for you? Well, yeah, I am certainly not part of any church. Let's put it that way. I am someone who is very strongly in the opinion of the priesthood of all believers. I mean, I guess that the term for me would be a deist, right? And of course that is in following with my some of my interests as a classical liberal, which isn't to say a modern day left wing person, but rather someone who believes in the values of the Enlightenment, liberty, equality, justice for all, and all of that sort of thing. Because the people who invented that were also people who believed very strongly. They had very strong faith. They studied the Bible meticulously, as I have, but they were looking for what they wanted to understand was God as a universal force, right? And not, this isn't the God of my tribe versus the God of your tribe, This is God, and it's bigger than everything, Let's see here. Otomanjiro says, if chthonic or nature gods are presumably nature spirits in the monotheistic cosmology, how would gods of celestial phenomena fit? Vaguely similar to astrological spirits. Well, yes, in this context, gods of the stars, the sun, the moon, and things like that are essentially archetypes, right? And archetypal spirits are a type of spirit. They're not a spirit of physical nature like you'd have, there could be and definitely in this setting in Poland, there are spirits of everything, right? Like I mentioned in the section on pagan living, like a typical pagan family believed that they had spirits surrounding them at all times, right? And this also still applied when they became Christian. That's an important detail that you see they felt that that these spirits were something that existed regardless. They didn't worship these spirits in particular. They saw them as lesser spirits, but Christian families would have had the same belief, and probably a lot of them did have the same beliefs, and maybe some of them still do have those beliefs even today, right? Like much later. So first of all, pagans would have a family spirit, right? Which was not a specific spirit, though often it was associated with the idea of their founding out ancestor, the first ancestor or something of the family who lived in the family house. But then there was also spirits that lived in the threshing floor, spirits of the bathhouse, spirits of the courtyard, spirits of the stables, spirits that looked after the milk, right? All of this stuff. That it was a spirit-filled world, and though they were most of them invisible most of the time, it was understood that they were real, right? And that they lived there and that they were a part of that world, right? So this is, I think, how to interpret that is as an archetypal concept, Okay, what else have we got here? Steambub says, I wonder if baptism is doing so well because it's the game you made that's the most D&D in feel. Well, that is possibly part of it. Yeah, it's a possibility. Now, I love running games of Sword and Caravan or Dark Albion. Dark Albion feels more like, yeah, at least when I run it, it seems more like a Game of Thrones than the Forgotten Realms or something like that. And Sword and Caravan is like um, a great traveling campaign, right? It's this the biggest sandbox imaginable, and and it's an adventure where you can have it could sort of be a bit like Traveler, right? That if you want to, you can be having you could definitely be having like a merchant group going from city to city trying to trade goods to make a profit and keep themselves afloat, right? But you can also have people doing like a travel log campaign, like Marco Polo or even Batuta, right, where you're going from place to place, discovering wonders and seeking out, strange things. Martin Bowman says it would be cool to see some philosopher classes that can build an Archimedes engineer or a Thales merchant or a Galen type healer. Well, that certainly would not fit very well in 11th century Poland. Let's say I don't think that was, this was a place that was pretty much right in the edge between the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, the early Middle Ages, right? It's not a place that had highly educated people for the most part. Again, apart from monks. Um, Oda Manjiro says Martin Bowman, like the old school companion sage. Well, yeah, exactly. The sage class in the old school companion is the guy who knows a lot of stuff and only knows a lot of stuff. And it's probably recommendable to play as an NPC rather than a player character, but you could certainly run it as a player character, just not a very tough one. That there isn't a sage class in Baptism of Fire because again, the only people who would be sages at these times would probably be monks living in monasteries. Surly Unicorn says the holy warrior gets sent after the holy man gets sainted. Well, a lot of times that's pretty much how it went. Saint Adalbert goes off to try to preach to the Prussians. They murder him, and so in comes Gerald to take care of everybody. By the way, there really was a Gerald, not the Witcher I'm talking about, but rather Geralt was the name of Mieszko's right hand man. His you could say his the hand of the king, so to say, who was a guy that he was a pagan like Mieszko himself was, and then when Mieszko converted, Geralt was already his toughest warrior at that point. He was incensed by this, right? He absolutely hated the fact that Mieszko had betrayed his ancestral gods and all of this, and was furious with him. But his sense of loyalty forced him to continue to obey his liege, but he refused to be baptized. And Mieszko forced Gerald to go with a Polish diplomatic journey to Rome. And when Gerald got to Rome, he was so amazed by its wonders and by the religious artifacts and by the mass. I mean, we don't know exactly what it was about it, but essentially he converted there, right? He suddenly saw the light and he became a Christian. He was baptized, and after that, he became the fiercest, most fanatical warrior that Mieszko had for Christianity, right? He is in the setting. He's the toughest holy warrior in the setting at that time, the most famous one, at least in the setting at the time, And he loved to go and kick pagan ass. So and I thought it interesting. His name was Gerald, and I don't know if the author of The Witcher was making a reference to this particular Gerald, right? But it could be. MLF says L&D was a great rule set. I'm so happy Baptism of Fire's backbone mechanics are linked to it. Yeah, it's the same system. It has slightly different details and options, but it is the same system in every respect. Like none of the core mechanics have been changed. Some of the classes have, some things have been added, but nothing has been really subtracted from it that and then replaced by a different thing, right? Calvadoni says anything's a dungeon. Well, yeah, it can be, right? And there are some things that you could use as a dungeon. There could be ruins. There are some weird rock mazes. You know, that's something. Jeff Ramdekar just did a super chat. Thank you so much. $5 Canadian super chat. That's got to be like at least 25 cents American. Have you given thought to creating your Greyhawk or Forgotten Realms style world and game? And if so, what would it be like? Well, the thing is, Jeff, I don't run a lot of that anymore, right? And when I did, I usually used those types of setting themselves. I mean, the closest thing that I run to fantasy is World of the Last Sun. World of the Last Sun is fantasy, but it's Gonzo fantasy, so it's a weirder world than Greyhawk or Forgotten Realms. If you mean, would I ever do a setting that is a generic fantasy world the way the Forgotten Realms are? I don't know, because I very rarely run something like that. You know, maybe I would do one that could be a sword and sorcery world, something like along those lines. But I don't think it's high on my priority list. You know, generic fantasy has just very rarely appealed to me. Not when you can compare it to historically authentic fantasy, which to me is a lot more interesting because it's really unique, right? Like, as much as you might argue there are differences, most D&D fantasy settings are very similar to each other, right? They feel the same. The characters, if you took a character out of Greyhawk and put him in Waterdeep, they would fit just as well, right? Like they would, like if you took a character out of Sword and Caravan and suddenly put them in London, or you put them in Krakow, they wouldn't fit. They would be different, right? Like there's so much more difference of setting, and those are three places that the three settings I have for the Medieval Authentic series are all places in the real world and places relatively close to each other in the real world. You know, so that shows you how repetitive to generic fantasy really is, how repetitive it looks like. I hope that answers your question, and I'm sorry if it disappoints you. Let me see. Calvin Cambridge says, can spirit magic easily emulate other systems like Mongol Tengrism for Sword and Caravan, or like some old Bithonic Chaos Cult for Lion Dragon? Well, it's similar, but it's not going to be the same, right? The manifestation is going to be somewhat different anyway. But it is in similar lines in some way, right? By the way, Calvin, if you're interested in that area of subject, I hope you are aware of the Pundit files. Oh, which issue is it? It is not 10, not 9. Should be 8, shouldn't it? I can't find it. Why is there not a specific section for the Pundit files in the Red Room? Someone needs to tell the Red Room that they need to make a specific Pundit files category so that the whole list can come up at once. They don't even have an author thing that I can click, do I? I'm gonna have a talk with them because I can't find, because it just goes like from the home page to the issues, and so the issues are all splattered all over the place, and I can't find them. See if that works. Okay. There we go. Pundit Files 8, Magic of the Kunlun Mountains. You should check that out at the Red Room. It's a collection of rituals that were used. This is the tantrism of the Tibetan plateau, and they were magical rituals that were used by the magicians of the Silk Road in the eastern part especially, and including by the Mongols, who, as you probably would know, a large section of the Mongol people became Tantrist Buddhists and in the Tibetan tradition. And that is probably a closer thing to it's not the shamanic Mongol system, right? But it's stuff that has ties, because it started as Tibetan shamanism. Otomanjiro says there are long barrows in Poland. That is correct. There are some tombs and things like that, ancient barrow mounds, and I think that those are mentioned in the encounter, the Wilderness Lore travel section of the book, right? Surly Unicorn says, does Polish pagan myth have an underworld of sorts? Well, it has the problem is we have very few reliable sources about that sort of thing. It has an other world, obviously. It has a world of fairies, and then besides that, though, it has a world of the gods, right? And there's an other world called Virai, which is a garden realm where it's always springtime and the souls of the dead travel, but only if they've been cremated by the proper funerary rites. But we know very little detail about it. We don't have as much information as we do, for example, of the Norse pagans with the nine worlds that they had in the Tree of Yggdrasil. There was a lot of crossover, by the way, between the Norse and the Slavic pagans. And so you can probably borrow some of that stuff from there. Chris Miller says, Pundit, your article is in issue 6. Oh, all right, so we'll have to wait till issue 6 to see my article in my next article of Mad Scribe magazine. What else have we got here? F2P says, I plan to write some mini books that can be converted into any system on how to run a Slavic setting. I just need to do some research on it to be more confident in writing. Well, good luck. It's harder to research than, if you're researching English history or something, that's so much easier than doing good research on medieval Polish history. Calvin, he says, I hate bards. I hate bards too, but I like the Skomrozni, because they're such scoundrels, right? That's pretty much in the name. Overkill Joe says a Viking Skald is cool too. So we got here. Gonad the Yadvingian. Sir, the Unicorn says about the cover, swords, fire, and the color red. You can't possibly go wrong. Adino says the cover gives me the same awesome vibes as a Man of War album cover. Yeah. My name says, kind of have to wonder how Christian conversion would actually affect the behavior of people like that. I don't know if you're talking about the Yodvingians there or about Gerald. Probably the Yodvingians based on where I am in the chat. But yeah, it's a good question. There isn't very much information after that about what happened. Martin Bowman says, I think the Enlightenment was a terrible thing. Communism came out of the Enlightenment. Well, communism is a negative effect of modernism. You're right about that. But on the other side, modernism also created this live stream. Modernism created the clothes we wear. Modernism created the fact that you don't have 10% of all women dying in childbirth, in any given childbirth, it pretty much has ended global poverty. It gave us capitalism, right? It's done a lot of very, very good things, modernism. And modernism has created a world where more people have more ability to succeed by merit than any other culture that ever existed. It's created a more educated world, more knowledgeable world. It is the only civilizational model that actually, in comparison to all other civilizations, dwarfs all of them. All the other ones are essentially equal to each other in value. You could maybe say, well, okay, Stone Age civilizations like that literally have done no progress at all are one level. And then every city building civilization is here. And the post-Enlightenment West is up there. It wasn't. It used to be in there with all of them, right? You could not say that medieval Europe was a vastly better civilization to be in than medieval China or medieval Middle East, right? It just wasn't. You could say it had some better parts than those and some worse parts than those, some good and some bad, right? But then the Enlightenment happens, and suddenly it is very clear that the West is just a whole other level of social evolution from every other society that ever had. So that is the difference. Enlightenment was the killer app that got us to the moon, you know, that sort of thing. Scrooge McDuck says, you've talked about random tables in the past, of course. Is it safe to assume we get some killer random tables in Baptism of Fire? Yes, you absolutely do. So I'm glad that you brought that up. Let's take a look over here at some of the random tables section here. So you get lots of random tables throughout the book, random tables for determining items, there's the random advancement system, that is what L&D has. But the bulk of it, of the random table goodness, you find in the appendices, starting with Appendix 1, which is road, trail, and Wilderland encounters. So Poland, and this time, has very few real roads. One of the things you have to emphasize in the setting is that this is a very, like I said, it's basically still at the end of the Dark Ages for them. And they also have a very low population density. So one of the big differences, for example, between this and Dark Albion is that in Dark Albion, if you've got a character and that character's in London, right, and they want to go out to the Wilderland and, you know, find really dangerous creatures, in theory, they would have to go quite a distance, right? Like they'd have to go off to the mountains, to the Pennines or to the Welsh hills, or they would have to go into like some of the deeper forests that were still around at that point. And that's where the wild things would be, right? And everywhere else, it was civilized. There were little villages and hamlets and towns and cities, right? Poland isn't like that in the 11th century. In the 11th century, as soon as you get more than 1 or 2 days distance from a city, you were in the Wilderland, and there were monsters everywhere, right? There was danger everywhere. And in terms of travel, you could go down the rivers. Now the rivers have their own dangers. There's a lot of river monsters. And you could go along trails, and there were like basically 4 meaningful roads in all of Poland. The Via Regia, which is in the south, the Baltic coastline, which is way up north, and it's in pagan territory, so it basically doesn't count. The Amber Road, which was the trade route that went from Venice all the way to, I think, Novgorod, and was called that because it was the trade route for amber. And then at a much lesser degree, the much shorter Salt Road, which goes from Poznan to the Baltic Coast Road. And then finally, a kind of almost trade route, like it's somewhere in between a trail and a road that went from Poznan to about Magdeburg in the Holy Roman Empire. And those are like the only real roads, right? And then everything else is either trails or pure Wilderland. So there are 3 different encounter tables that, in theory, you're going along. Let's say you're playing sandbox play. You go out there, and depending on whether you're traveling in the road, on a trail, or in a Wilderland, you roll on the respective encounter table. And these tables will have potential monster encounters where you roll the monster by, or monsters or animals or things like that. That you roll those by another set of tables that are based by terrain, right? So if you're going through a forest, or if you're crossing the mountains, or going through a swamp, or plains or whatever. But then they have a lot of other different kinds of encounters that you might have as well, right? So in the Wilderlands, for example, when you go out right into the Wilderlands, you could have a no encounter result, yeah, or you could have bandits, a creature, which would be by terrain type. You could encounter hermits, you could encounter hunters or woodsmen, you could encounter a random object, a random pagan community, random warriors, random person, random settlement, random weird site, rebels, weather, and wildmen, right? So all those that have random in front of the name in their respective sections have different subtables that you would roll to determine what kind of random thing you encounter. And so you can find entire little communities, usually of pagans in the deeps of the Wilderland, right? You can also find really weird places and really weird features. So all of that adds to this enormous sense of adventure that you as the DM can be running it in real time. So you don't know what they're going to find either, you know? And then of course there's, you know, the next appendix, you have events in towns and cities. So when you're traveling out of a city, heading to the next city, the DM can roll to see, well, what's going on in that city? And there are all these different potential events that could be happening in the city or town or whatever that you're going to that provide potential adventure cues. Then you also have, and you know, people who've got like Sword and Caravan are familiar with some of this stuff because a lot of it is based on similar ideas. You've got the unwanted attention table, right? Which is that if your characters are sketchy sort of people and you spend too long in one city or town, there's a certain amount of time you can roll as a DM to see how long it takes before there's a chance that the local authorities will start to be worried about them, right? And then that chance of percentage based on just how scuzzy your characters are or how you know legitimate they look, right? And the opposite. But usually unwanted attention is not good. And then there's city encounter tables, which includes like mission tables for patrons that want to hire you to do something. There are urban rumor tables that provide, you know, a whole bunch of adventure cues. And yeah, so those are like kind of the main things you have in terms of those kind of random tables and those kind of random encounters. You also get a social encounter table, which takes a few of the examples from social encounters on the Silk Road and lets the DM have those handy in the book for things like haggling, animal handling, gossip, information gathering, or seduction. And then the last two appendices are the domain rules and the legend rules, which we might get to in a little bit. But meanwhile, I want to keep checking out what you guys are saying in the live chat. Chris Miller says Pundit is really good at creating cool tables. Thank you. Or good tables, sorry. My name says I've been reading a book called Pagans and Christians that claims that the Christians were more likely to display animosity towards other beliefs. Well, I guess I mean, yes, in the sense that Christians believed that all other gods were false gods besides their own, right? James Gang, $5 super chat. Thank you again, James. When did you know you wanted to create games? By the way, you're in my top 10 game designers of all time. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Look, I wanted to create an RPG since I was 12 years old, I think, you know, like, and I literally did, you know, I know that when I remember when I was 12, I started playing D&D when I was about 11, 12 years old. And I know that it was probably it wasn't more than 2 months after that I was starting to like trying to make my own D&D because I found out that there was more games than just D&D, and I played a couple of like the earliest games that I had played were probably D&D and then Palladium games. And I wanted to make my own stuff, right? Like and you know, like probably a lot of you have over the years made up a bunch of rules, and usually they were very derivative and not especially good, but and they probably made no sense. And I mean, but when I was 12, 13 years old, it was my dream to be a full-time game designer of our tabletop RPGs, right? And then eventually I kind of thought, well, no, that's never going to happen, right? So I studied you know, history and comparative studies, and I was going to be an academic, and then I kind of got off that route when I realized that I actually was more interested in actually knowing something about history and religious studies rather than being an academic. And then I did a variety of jobs, got into a number of different religious movements and things like that, and became kind of an expert on certain things that I practiced. And I had never expected. Like, I mean, then I started the Pundit blog in like around 2005. And even then, when I started the Pundit blog, I had no notion that that was going to lead to me actually designing games, right? I thought I was going to have this blog. I wasn't going to make any money off it. I was just doing it because I was pissed off at some of the stuff going on in the hobby, right? So I started writing about, how crappy the Forge was and how stupid the people, the mods at RPGNet were, and some of the other problems I saw in the hobby today, and people liked it. They enjoyed it, and there you go. But even then I didn't make a game, right? And it was really when the OSR started that I realized, well, hang on, I could try to do something, and I my first RPG, Forward to Adventure, is very, in comparison to anything I did after, is very imperfect, and was, fairly flawed. The Forward to Adventure Game Master's Notebook, I even did it. I mean, it was successful enough that I sold games, and I did a source book for it, and that sold, and it was all right, But then I started to hone my trade. Ironically, after that, I didn't go right into the OSR because the OSR at that time, all they wanted was clones, and if you did something that was different from a clone, they didn't want it, The next thing I actually ended up doing was Lords of Olympus, which I did to try to preserve the legacy of the Amber game after Eric Wujcik's death. And that was very successful, but it wasn't really my game. I was entirely trying to work on the basis of the diceless system, and it has improvements in the sense of clarifying how that system works, but it's not. I mean, I guess the part of it that was mine was all the section on Greek myth and the Greek deities. And I think that was one of the things I suddenly realized when people feedback to me came along, that a lot of them were really impressed by that section, by the fact that it's such a good source book on Greek mythology. And I realized, oh, hang on, my skills as a historian and as a comparative studies guy could apply to the type of game design I do, And then I consulted on 5e, and then after that, I started doing Dark Owl. Well, I did Arrows of Indra before I consulted on 5e, and then and that was a success. Not compared to this, right? But it was still a very good success. I still get royalties every month for it, right? And then I consulted on 5e, and then after that, I just started going full on with Dark Albion first, and I saw the success. Dark Albion was a big success, not as big as this one, but still big. And I went on from there. So I hope that answers your question. Cold Fusion says, how do you spell the name of the Baptism of Fire Bard class? The name of the Baptism of Fire Bard class is Skomrozny. It is Skomroszny. That's how it's spelled. Zuriel says, yo, already bought the book, got to represent my Polish roots. Well, thank you very much, Zuriel. I do hope that Polish gamers like it. Some people are saying, oh, well, in Poland, this will be so, well, I don't know about that, right? Because I'm not sure. First of all, it's not, like, this is very early Polish history, and it's going to be, a lot of what's in there is going to look different than later. Like, I'm sure there are going to be some Poles that'll be like, well, where are the winged hussars, right? Because Poles, I think actually Poles have more awareness of their history and their culture than a lot of other peoples, just because of the history of the kind of struggles that the Polish people have had. But that, even so, I think that just like the average American hasn't got a lot of their own history straight, and it's only like 300 years, not even. There's a lot of Poles that aren't going to be all that knowledgeable about their own history. And furthermore, as I just recently said, like gamers, Latin American gamers, I'm in Latin America, right? Latin American gamers do not go crazy over RPGs where you play gauchos in the pampas, right? They don't. The games they want to play are the Forgotten Realms and Ravenloft and Dark Sun and that sort of thing. They want to play D&D and they want to play maybe Traveler or Star Wars or whatever, right? They want to play the same stuff, the same geek stuff that geeks everywhere want to play. And I'm kind of presuming that Polish gamers are the same. And so I think some Polish gamers would probably be like, why the hell would I want to play games set in Poland, But I do appreciate people who are Polish, especially if they're enjoying this game. It's one thing I worry about, right? Because I'm a historian and I am Polish, but I've never been to Poland and I'm not part of the kind of modern day Polish culture, right? Lord Sathar says, was there a big Jewish representation in Poland at the time, or do you have to wait until later? Yeah, at this time, in the early period of the PS court, there were not a lot of Jews in Poland. There were a few Jewish merchants who were operating in the really big cities, the ones that were like on the Via Regia mainly, so in the south. And there were some others that traveled through Poland, but the migration of Jews to Poland had not yet happened. Because contrary to what some people have recently been saying, Jews are not from Poland, right? They arrived there, but they arrived more so in the next century than in this one in terms of the setting, right? Though one of the earliest chronicles that gives us a lot of the historical information that we know about Poland today, about this period of Poland, was from a Jew who had been traveling through Poland. He was a Jew from I think he was from Cordoba, but I'm not remembering for sure. But yeah, he must have been a Jew from Cordoba who had been traveling across Europe, and he had this travel log. It was really remarkable character, and he gave us a lot of the information that we know about PS Poland at this time. Martin Bowman says there must have been Byzantine Roman intellectuals in Poland. No, there were very, very few Byzantine Roman intellectuals in Poland at this time. I'm not quite sure what you mean by Byzantine Roman intellectuals. By the 11th century, you were either a Byzantine intellectual or a Roman intellectual. You weren't both. It was no longer, there was that separation already existed, So there were Roman intellectuals in Poland. They were called monks. There were very few Byzantine intellectuals in Poland. The dividing line is between Poland and Kiev and Kiev, right? Where Kiev became Byzantine and Poland was Catholic, right? So one was Roman Catholic and the other one was Eastern Orthodox. Let me see here. I presume the Vedmak was the inspiration for the Witch Hunter. After all, it was as it was for the Witcher. Maybe you said so, but I walked up. I didn't specifically say so, but yes, that is part of the inspiration, you could say. But another one is the Kresnik, which was a witch hunter of the Carpathians, who was especially an expert in the slaying of undead. But yeah, it comes from a real tradition. I might be exaggerating it a little bit, but it comes from a real tradition. Jeff Ramdekar says, I need to check out World of the Last Sun. Well, you really should. It's a fantastic Gonzo fantasy world. MLF says, L&D has just the right touch of everything to make a great campaign or one-shot. Oh, thank you for that. Question Pundit, how long did it take you to write this book? Additionally, were the Pundit files developed during a break from writing Baptism of Fire or more along with it? Okay. So it took me roughly a year, I guess I would say, to write this book. Part of what made it faster is that a lot of the rules are the same as the rules in Lion and Dragon, right? So I didn't have to do a lot of redesign of rules for it, just the adaptations that were necessary. Most of the time that took was in the form of research, historical research. And especially researching stuff like the magic of the slabs, and then, you know, making magic items based on that, or magic rituals or things like that, and researching the monsters and their particular qualities. As far as the Pundit files, though, I started working on the Pundit files after I was done writing Baptism of Fire. I finished writing Baptism of Fire around August of last year, if I'm remembering correctly. Chris Miller might correct me a bit, although I see he's had to go. Yeah, I think it was around August. And the Pundit files, I didn't start the Pundit files right then either, because I was finishing up with, I think, Wilderlands. But eventually I got it in my head that I wanted to do the Pundit files, and then I started doing it, and now it's been, what is it? I guess it's been like about 22 weeks ago that the first one came out, right? So I wrote several of them in advance, and so I've always got, you know, 3 or 4 ahead of the current one to release. But yeah, those were developed after the Baptism of Fire. Chris Miller said, I have to go, guys. Thank you to the Pundit for the opportunity to work on Baptism of Fire. I hope everyone enjoys the book. Have a good night. Thank you so much, Chris, for popping by. Let's see what else we got to talk about here. A lot of good nights for Chris Miller. He has done a fantastic job, I have to say. Shoot. Oh, here we go. A lot of talk about philosophers here. Odamanjiro says, speaking of chaos cults, medieval authentic chaos sorcery would be nice. Ruin harvest, curses, fly arm with enemy, animate the dead, make your own hand of glory. Well, a lot of that is basically already in Lion and Dragon, isn't it? And in the old school companion 1, I mean, that's what summoning of demons does, right? That's you also get some of that here in like folk magic and stuff like that. There wasn't a school of chaos sorcery or something like that. There was magic, and there was magic that involved curses. Curses were very common magic. And there was the summoning of demons or devils or things like that to cause harm to people. And there was, you know, that would be, I guess, what you could call witchcraft. But yeah, if you've got my books, you must have seen a lot of that. Right? I mean, look at the demon summoning section in Baptism of Fire, for starters. MLF says, gotta go. Thanks for doing this, Pundit. Can't wait for to get this book in my hands. Good luck. Good evening, everyone. Okay. Thank you for coming, MLF, and for your comments. Okay, it seems like we're getting a very long conversation here that I'm kind of starting to wonder if this is actually a troll or not. Because it's filling up the chat. So do you guys have any more questions for Baptism of Fire, or should I end this here? Okay, Odamanjiro here says, are there straight up new L&D spells in Baptism of Fire, or are they adapted from your previous Pundit Presents other work? No, Baptism of Fire does have a couple of some new magic stuff. It has some magic stuff that's identical from Lion and Dragon, because some of the same types of magic apply there. It has new miracles, because the miracles have now been split into 2 different religious classes. And it has some new magic that has been imported from some of the Pundit Presents stuff, and some stuff that is new, right? Like especially some of the Slavic pagan magic. But you know, a lot of it, if you've got every book I've ever made, then you've got a lot of the magic that was already there before. But But there is some new stuff. Steambob says, any plans for supplements? Well, yeah, I do have some plans. Like I said, the first thing that's going to come out related directly to BOF is the Medieval City Guide to Poznan, which will be a Pundit Files issue. But I do have in mind to do a source book. I'll probably do a few source books. Speaking of which, just before I continue answering this question, I had meant to point out, and I kind of forgot about it now. Aside from Baptism of Fire, Chris Miller has also made for me Sword and Caravan and all of its various source books. And he has now decided to put them all together in a premium bundle on DrivethruRPG. So you can now get, if you want to, all four, the whole collection of Sword and Caravan, which is the Sword and Caravan main setting book, the Heroes and Villains of the Silk Road book, the Social Encounters along the Silk Road book, and the Wilderlands of the Silk Road book. All four of those, which are normally $132 total in their top version, right? So you get the premium, either hardcover or softcover, depending on which book, because two of the books have hardcover options, two of them don't. Premium color, all four books, plus all four of the PDFs for just $88. So be sure to check that out in Mad Scribe Games, the Sword and Caravan Complete Premium Hardcover Bundle. If you haven't yet bought those books, that's a great deal. Okay, so back to the supplements. I'm probably going to do several supplements for it, just like I did for Sword and Caravan. Some smaller, some bigger. The first one that I have in mind is one that will be expanding the section on the nobility and kind of the aristocrats of the PS crown, talking more about the Slacha houses, their traditions, their own mythology, and then giving sample characters of the different houses, and so you can, if you're running a campaign where the characters are either working in a noble house or they're all different nobles or things like that, it'll provide that kind of, the posh campaign, let's say, right? And the thing about the nobility, the Slacha in Poland, is that they believed that they came from a slightly different culture from the commoners, and they believe that they were descended from this ancient traditional, or this ancient culture. The culture of the Slacha was the culture of the ancient Sarmatians instead of the Pannonians, right? So the Sarmatians were this culture of horse riding warriors that had these own special traditions, and that was like meant to be the reason why the traditions and behaviors of the nobility were different from the commoners in Poland. And so, of course, I'm probably going to call this book 101 Sarmatians. That's going to be the name of that book. So besides that, I don't know what else I'm going to do quite yet, but I'm sure that I'm going to have at least another couple of books that'll probably be either adventure books or other material, and there's probably going to be a lot of Pundit Files issues that are going to be dedicated to Baptism of Fire in the future, right? I mean, there's still going to be a lot that won't be about Baptism of Fire, but they'll be added to the queue of things that are going to show up, right? We've already had an Invisible College source book for Baptism of Fire, which is one of the biggest issues we've done so far, which is the Invisible College 1930s campaign. There might be something for Star Adventurer that will be done in Pundit Files. There's definitely going to be something for World of the Last Sun, and lots of stuff for Sword and Caravan and Dark Albion, but now Baptism of Fire will join that list. All right, so some people want to know about the legends and domain rules. So the domain rules are the rules for running a territory, right? For running your own area. And this is, you guys have seen other RPGs with domain rules, but these I think are a little bit different from the standard, because like even I did domain rules in Lion and Dragon, right? And in Lion and Dragon, those domain rules were set up to focus on like, what is this noble house that owns this territory? What is their level of personal power and stuff like that? And that sort of fits very well for a late medieval setting, right? Like the thing that mattered in Lion and Dragon's domain rules is what is the family's military power, like how many troops can they get? What is their financial power? How much money do they make from their lands? And what is their political influence? And that was the central focus, because it's outward looking. But in a early Middle Ages or late Dark Ages setting, that doesn't really work, right? And nor does it work this idea that the domain ruler has total control over everything that goes on in his lands, so he can like manipulate mechanics to generate new stuff and have it all under control, right? So instead, the domain rules in Baptism of Fire are set up to reflect the uncertainty of the Dark Ages, and that the focus is more inward. It's like, what is going on in your lands, right? And how are your lands working? How well are they functioning? And so the statistics here are not, military power, financial power, and political power. The two main statistics that you work with are peasant happiness and retainer loyalty. Okay, so if your peasants there's a statistic for how happy you've managed to keep your peasants. If that statistic gets too low, they start producing badly. If it gets lower than that, they revolt, And then there's a statistic for how happy or how loyal are your retainers to you, right? And if you treat them well and do good things and have success in battle and stuff like that, and then their loyalty will be higher. But if if you're an absentee guy and you're not really very careful, then they're going to be lower. And this is the tricky part, is that a lot of the stuff that can happen in your lands doesn't depend on you doing a check. It depends on the loyalty of your retainers, because they're the ones that are going to be there making it. You're giving the order, but they're the ones that are making it happen. So there's every chance that your own retainers can screw up, and they're more likely to screw up if they're not loyal to you, right? So this is a very different way of looking at domain rules. Besides that, though, it still has the idea of like resources. Of course, you make money from or you make wealth from your lands, and there are moves you can attempt to do, right? Like you can try to invest in new land resources, recruit more peasants, or you can increase taxes, or you can try to sell off your land or trade it off, or so on. There are times when you might have to fight in battle, and there's a large an abstract large-scale combat mechanic in the domain rules. So if you've got two noble houses that are fighting a little war with each other, you can use those rules to determine how it goes and how many of your people die. And of course, that ties in also to the happiness and loyalty rules, in that there are times when, quite a few times actually, when choosing to do something will make your peasants potentially happier, but your retainers less happy, or vice versa, right? You can do stuff that your retainers will love you for it, but your peasants won't, right? So you have to really try to work out balances. And then there's there's still annual random events that happen that create different conditions of good or bad, positive stuff or disasters, and lifestyle cost. And there is an influence mechanic, which lets you determine, based on just how successful a landholder you are, what kind of influence you might have in the PS court. And also, part of these domain rules determine a whole series of steps that determines where your character lord is, between being like completely banished with a price on your head by the crown, to being like one of the most famous loyal retainers of the crown, right? Like one of the guys in their inner circle, and every step in between, right? So it's very well set up for domain play, and for also kind of dynastic domain play. Like in that section, I put in the rules for like having kids and generating heirs, so because that's you can, because like the timeline of the campaign, in theory, depending on where you start, right? Like the default starting is 1025, so that would be about 25 years of a campaign. But if you started 991, which is where I started my campaign, for example, that's even longer, right? That's more stuff you get to do. So there's a lot of room there for it. So that's the domain rules. I'll get to legends in 1 second. Starlaw says, do any of the classes have alignment restrictions? Yes, some of the classes do have alignment restrictions. Skomrosny can't be lawful, neither can thieves. And holy men can't be chaotic, right? I think those are the ones. There might be a couple of others. I'm not, I'd have to double check. But yes, some classes can be anything, but there are some classes that can't. Vork Hammerfist says, I'm really enjoying the section of magic in Baptism of Fire, especially the bit on folk magic and the one on glamours. Do you have any recommendation on where to learn more about them? Oh, geez. Well, look, all the sources that we really have on stuff like glamour and enchantment come basically out of folk tales and legends. There is no solid sources. There are some historical references to like people who were caught trying to enchant the king or stuff like that, like in even as late as 15th century or even 16th century England, right? There are people that were charged with that. But there's no detail really on how the process worked. But we do know that it's something that everybody then believed could work, right? That they all understood it as being magic that could happen, right? And of course, there's high magic that does that too, right? Like there's a lot of Goetic magic or the magic of Abramelin or stuff like that, these ritual book magics that the book learning magicians used that had as like the powers that you could use them to make a person fall in love with you, or to make two friends become enemies, or two enemies become friends, or stuff like that, right? Or to create dancing lights, or make, juggling monkeys appear, so like there was glamour and enchantment in the high magic too. But in terms of what we really know about how it was meant to work, the low magic, we don't have a lot. And in terms of folk magic, we have some idea of how folk magic rituals work because there were some accounts of them. So like all the rituals of folk magic in that section are based on real sources, most of which are medieval, but some of which are Renaissance, and some are even as late as like the 17th century. Because, of course, folk magic has a long standing, like there was lots of people in the English speaking world doing folk magic right up until the late 19th and early 20th centuries, right? But we can't assume directly that those were exactly like how they did it 500 years ago, because we know, anthropological study shows that even traditions of folk magic change from generation to generation, right? So there's different techniques that get applied. But I think it's the folk magic section is a pretty accurate depiction of what medieval folk magic would have been like. My name says 101 Sarmatians, ouch. Well, I can't resist myself, Speaking as a Sarmatian, I think it's funny. Steam Up says, how hard would it be to integrate Axe into the game? I'm not sure if you mean to run the Baptism of Fire setting using Axe rules, or do you mean to integrate the Axe domain rules into Baptism of Fire? In either case, I mean, obviously, because they're both OSR games, it would certainly be possible. There would be some difficulties, like the classes in Axe are not, and in Adventure Conquer King are not set up to be professions of medieval Poland. So I would say it would not be as good if you were running the setting of PS Poland in Adventure Conquer King, right? Like it's not built for the setting specifically the way that the rules in Baptism of Fire are. But you could do it, yeah, sure. And I mean, and I'm sure you could integrate the Axe domain rules. If you didn't like my domain rules, you could use those there. You'd have to make sure to do them at the scale that is correct for a period of the Dark Ages, right? Because as I understand it, the Adventure Conquer King setting presumes a fairly sophisticated medieval-esque society. Like he's always, Alexander's always talked about it as if the Roman Empire had never fallen or something like that, right? Is the setting. So that would imply a much stronger level of commerce and trade than what you would see in Poland at this time. But other than that, you could do it if you kept that in mind. Durender says, could you describe what were the influences of Sarmatism on politics and culture during and after the period in which baptism of fire is set? Well, Sarmatism, we don't know quite where it starts, but it becomes more and more significant as time goes by. And there's a reason for that, which is that in the early period, in the period of baptism of fire, for example, there are the Slacha, and they have their clans, these different groups, that use different heraldic shields and core names, which are usually all big extended families, but not always, because sometimes people who are not of the original family that had that shield would be adopted into that family. Like, for example, some great knight that had done a service for the Abdank family, they would elevate him to the status of a member of that clan, right? Or sometimes it was through marriage, but of a lesser level, right? So you had like cadet branches. And at that, and in the earlier period, like in the 10th and 11th century, it was because it wasn't high medieval yet, and it was essentially like they had in their grandfather's time, they were barbarian tribesmen, right? And now they're medieval, a medieval, not even feudalist system yet, right? So at that time, the difference between the nobility and the common man was not as great, right? Like the nobility was basically just the chiefs of the clans, right? The chiefs of the tribes. But as time goes by, Sarmatism becomes more and more significant because the nobility want to create a bigger distinction between them and the commoners, you know. Even though Poland had a couple of unusual characteristics compared to the rest of Europe, in that, first of all, Poland had there was not a division, a literal division. Like they invent Sarmatism. As far as we know, it's all bullshit, right? Like the medieval, the Polish Slacha families are almost certainly not descended from a totally separate group from the Polish commoner families, right? But they invent that. But in other places, that was the difference, right? In England, you had the Normans and the Saxons, and before that, you had the Saxons and the Celts, right? And in France, you had the same thing. The Franks and the Celts were not the same people, right? So in many parts of Europe, the nobility were literally a different people, at least partly so, from the commoners, and that wasn't the case in Poland, and also in many of the Western European countries to the west of Poland, the nobility very quickly established itself to be a class highly apart from the common man. Whereas because in fact the Polish were not two separate peoples, but rather were a group of disparate tribes that got unified by Christianity, and Christianity became one of the central tenets. One of the things I keep saying that Christianity was vastly more appealing to the pagan, to people in the European Dark Ages world than paganism was. One of the things that did that was the notion of equality, right? It's built into the system, even though it was never fully practiced, because obviously there was totally different treatments for aristocrats versus peasants. But in principle, and in the spiritual principle especially, it was understood that all of them were the same, right? In the pagan cultures, you would have, the chiefs and the kings and the great warriors were the ones that got to go to Valhalla. Everybody else was just stuck in hell, right? After they died. But in Christianity, all that mattered was, did you believe? Were you absolved of your sins? Did you have faith? And if you did, and you were a king, and you were the poorest peasant, if you had those two guys, they would both go to the same heaven, right? And if you didn't believe, if the king didn't believe and the poorest peasant did, the poorest peasant would be the one that would end up in heaven, and the king would be the one that would end up in hell, right? It doesn't matter how heroic you were, or how rich you were, or how famous you were. It only mattered how faithful you were, and that was a huge selling point for Christianity, and part of why it spread so effectively. And so because of that, and because Christianity was the defining trait, like Poland doesn't date itself back, like to this day, Poland, the country, does not date its point of origin to when the first king was crowned in 1025. It dates back to when Mieszko, who never got to be king, was only Grand Duke, was baptized in 966. Right, that was the or was it 960? No, I think it was 966. Yeah, 966. The baptism of Poland. He becomes the first leader of Poland, even if he wasn't a king yet. And Poland is born on that day, right? Like then, because the unifying thing for Poland is not because there were all these different people. There were the Polans and the Goplan and the all of these the Kuwavians and the Pomeranians and the Silesians, the Masovians. They were different people. They were all Slavs, but they had a lot of huge differences between them. And Mieszko realized he could never unify a state based on tribal commonality because there wasn't enough of it. And the pagans didn't even worship the same gods in some of these different areas, right? But Christianity was the unifying force. And so in part because of that Christianity, because of that principle of equality, it meant that in Poland, there was always less of a division, especially in the earlier period, between the common people and the aristocracy. And that didn't really get changed very much until the very late period, until basically the crap period of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, when you had stuff like the Golden Veto and all of the abuses that the nobility did that essentially drove Poland into the ground. I'm sorry to say, I'm pretty sure my ancestors were involved in that too, right? But there we are. So it was different, right? And but the thing is, as time went by and the Polish aristocracy became more and more haughty, that they became more and more obsessed with their Sarmatian history, pseudo history that they had invented, So my name, folk magic, a fish ritual to seduce a man. Yeah, exactly. That's I don't know. Some people think that's ridiculous, but it's what they really did back then is that sort of thing, that sort of folk magic, right? And I think that's really amusing, right? Otamanjiro says you can find similar spells to folk magic in their side, Nick Galdebrock. Yeah, and well, there's like I said, there were Vikings all over the place in Poland at this time, and you have, because of that, rune magic is included in the game, and including there you have like rune staffs, right? Rune sigils that you can have a character end up learning how to make. Then we have Drew Enders says, also, did the Polish pagans of that period have concepts of fate and destiny like the Norns or the Greek fates? What were their foundational myths and spiritual beliefs? Well, the answer to that is that they had different foundational myths and spiritual beliefs from each other. They weren't all there. There wasn't like the Greek pantheon or the Norse pantheon. That didn't really exist in Slavic paganism. There were different regions, and there were certain deities that were kind of common, although they often would appear under a variety of different names, right? So there was like one that was called Svedovitz in one place, and he was called Radagast in another, and there was Triglav, and there were a number of these deities that you look at them and you're like, yeah, that's the same deity, but it's in a slightly different area, so they look a bit different, right? But the fact is, there's a lot of stuff about Polish paganism that we just don't know because the sources are all lost. So in that section on Polish pagans, I put in all the info I can that we do know, and then make some creative guesses about what we don't, right? So there are certain parts of it that are present in the book, but there's a lot of stuff that is left out because I didn't want to just outright invent something, right? Where I can, I speculate, and sometimes I speculate more broadly than in others. But we don't have all the info, right? Are Biezi in the monster section? Yes, they are. There's all kinds of great monsters in the monster section. My name says so. The Polish nobility couldn't claim to be superior people for any real reason, so they just made up something and ran with it. In essence, yes, but I mean that's pretty common to every nobility, right? All the nobility end up inventing pseudo histories for themselves. Just the Polish one was particularly complex, It was particularly unusual and interesting, right? Create a swarm of bees is an Anglo-Saxon charm, yeah. So I want to get to, before I forget, the Legends section. So the last appendix is called Legends and Infamy, and it presents an optional set of rules that allow you, and I'm gonna be totally clear here, that the thing that inspired me to do this is the Red Room, right? The Red Room have their Wretched games, and they had a system, and they still do have that system, but in second edition, I think they've altered it to include both virtue and vice, which was my suggestion to them, actually. But originally they just had the vices, right? And like in the Red Room, you picked a vice that was like defining of your character in the original Wretched rules, and you would also get XP based on following the 7 vices, right? Like you got XP for doing stuff that was wrathful or slothful or greedy or things like that, because you're playing anti-heroes at best or outright bastards at worst in the game. Now, I didn't want to do that, but I loved the idea that they had essentially had a mechanic based on a kind of alignment. And so I was thinking about what I wanted to do with that here. And I think that the thing that I wanted to do was to use the vices and the virtues as guidelines that would determine the level of fame or infamy that your character would have. So in this, these are optional rules, but I think they're very interesting rules that essentially allow you to generate mechanics for the player characters to have to determine how famous the player characters are, how well known they are for their deeds. And so these are all points that you get based on actions you take in contexts where people will find out about it, right? So that it has to be something that either other people see or that you will then later tell other people about and they believe it, right? And so the virtues are the classical virtues: prudence, temperance, justice, fortitude, faith, hope, and charity. And then the vices are basically the classical ones also: lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, envy, wrath, and pride. And so when the DM determines that your character has acted in a way that reflects one of these virtues or vices, and there are very particular guidelines to each one. So for example, prudence, I say here, prudence is known as the mother of all virtues. It reflects the power of virtuous reason. I'm giving this, by the way, that I'm reading is my writing, but it's I'm taking this from the interpretation of how people in the Middle Ages saw the virtue of prudence, right? So prudence is known as the mother of all virtues. It reflects the power of virtuous reason, and it is through reason that all other virtues can be understood. This is manifested by the use of one's knowledge and intellect for various purposes, as opposed to mere cunning, which is the use of one's intellect for personal benefit. So virtuous purposes is prudence. Cunning is when you're using your intellect for personal benefit. If a character overcomes some great challenge by use of their knowledge or reasoning in a way that overcomes danger or difficulty, and does so in a notable public forum, they will gain legend points equal to their intelligence score. Examples could include convincing some lord or powerful person to behave in a virtuous way through debate or discourse, avoiding some dangerous situation by one's own wits, or coming up with a plan or strategy in a battle or quest that proves victorious, right? So that the guy that's got a good intelligence and whose character knows how to apply it will get a lot of points in prudence, you know. And there are similar ones for all the other ones: temperance, justice. Some of them obviously can give you points for acts of violence, let's say. So, for example, in justice, you can get points in justice if you avoid cruelty but give fair punishment for wrongdoing, treating those of lower social status fairly but not indulgently, or treating those of higher status respectfully but without self-interested license. If a PC is in a situation where they must take justice in their hands, they will receive legend points for bringing a wrongdoer to justice, but only if it is for the sake of justice itself, rather than for personal vengeance. If they do so, they will receive legend points equal to their wisdom plus 1 point per hit die of each opponent he defeats in just combat, but only in conflicts where there are witnesses to tell the tale. Stuff like that, right? And so you generate these points. You did similar stuff with the vices, right? So you have, for example, the sin of sloth. You might wonder, well, how the hell does that apply? Well, okay, so sloth is seen as general. Sloth is more than just general laziness. It is more accurately the rejection of one's material or spiritual duty to labor. That's the medieval view of it, right? So slothfulness includes avoiding work when one is able-bodied, but it can also mean doing inferior work or cutting corners, which was seen in the medieval world as a kind of theft. It also applies to students who refuse to study, able-bodied men who avoid military duty, any Christian who misses one of the obligatory masses, of which there are quite a few, and I list them here, right? Without good reason. Engaging in public sloth will gain infamy points equal to one's dexterity, but double that if you're a clergyman avoiding mass. So don't be a clergyman and avoid mass. So you can get points in both of these. And I also have a list of the pagan virtues, which were different from the Christian ones. The pagan virtues in this time would have been fortitude, indulgence, fidelity, virility, honor, vengeance, and idolatry. Eventually, if you get enough points in your virtue score, you can end up becoming well known, right? So if you end up having a cumulative total of 100 points of legend or infamy, your character would have a reputation in the local area he spends the most time in, right? If he gets to 500, he might be at least somewhat known in all the region of Poland he spends the most time with, to the point that it'll give modifiers to reactions depending on how people interpret you, right? Like and how they interpret whether you're infamous or famous, and whether they like your fame or they like your infamy, right? And if you get to like 1,000 points of legend or infamy, you will get special benefits because of it, depending on which was your strongest virtue, right? You will gain legend bonuses. So your character becomes literally tougher or better in some way because he's so famous, you know. So this is a mechanic that you can choose not to use at all, right? Like it's just entirely modular. It doesn't appear in any context in the rest of the rules. But if you use it, it'll add both an element that will let the player characters gauge and the DM gauge for them how well known the characters are and how much gravitas they have at a personal level, right? And I think it's a really interesting mechanic. So that's why I added it. Frank Distrust says, you've been teasing us since December, looking forward to finally getting this. Yeah, well, pick it up. Don't miss the boat, man. It's the #1 bestseller on DriveThru. Is it still? Just checking. Yes, it still is. It is still the #1 bestseller on DriveThru. I just can't believe this. Because I mean, a lot of my books did actually get into the top 10 or top 5 or top 20 at different moments. But like, I think even like Lion and Dragon, I think, got in the general bestseller list. It ended up in the top 5 for a couple of days, but it never got to #1. I think it might have, but for like a day or a half a day or something like that, right? So this is just nutcase success. Oh yeah, so Oda Manjiro says there were definitely Slavic gods that got thrown around in modern, not contemporary scholarship that were likely made up, like the Wendish skeleton god Flynn. He's neat though, so I'd use him anyway. Yeah, well, there are some gods that we're not sure about, right? And there's some gods that were purely speculative and that may not have ever been gods, right? And there's also, but part of it also is that there are records, but the records of those pagan gods are from Christian sources. And so they can't entirely be trusted. And some of them are from Christian sources that are based on third-hand accounts, you know? So like, you have to be like really, you have to be really speculative about it, you know? My name says, I'm looking forward to reading the Fame and Infamy section a lot. Okay, well, I'm glad for that. There are a lot of very interesting pagan gods in the context of the Slavic religion. Somebody's asking about like what's interesting about the pagan gods. But I don't just include like these are the gods, right? I like talk about like some of the special times and practices. So in the first week of November is Dziady, which is sacred to the god Velesh, the god of death. Pagan witches and magicians can perform a rite that lets them contact deceased spirits of their own ancestors or the ancestors of others present in the ritual, right? So that's a ritual you can only do once a year, but it's, and I give all the details about it, right? Or the witches' night on the 12th of December in the deep of winter, in the night that is most sacred to the witches who serve the Earth Mother. It is on this night that their spells are the most powerful, and ordinary pagans are deeply fearful of this night. No one goes out on this night. Children and virgin girls are watched with great care, lest the witches steal them as sacrifices. Strong snowstorms are a sure sign that witches are performing powerful magic nearby. They'll meet on this night in magical places that are known to be a week in the veil between this world and the fairy world, or on the edge of the forest and civilized land, or in the junctions of rivers. And southeast of Tyniec on the Slovak border, the largest grouping of witches come together on Babia Gora, the mountain of crones. They're protected during their Sabbath by bears, lynxes, and wolves whom they control. Witches can be found on this mountain any time of the year, making it a very dangerous place, but on the witches' night, it is especially deadly. Let's take a look here. I've got a whole section on like specifically pagan magical objects, like the thunder candle. That's a very interesting object. So different pagan deities. Chernobog, the black god, who is seen as an evil god. Chorus, the thunder god, the earth mother. Mokoshnika, a highly popular pagan goddess. She's considered to be the wife of Veles. Her name means the wet one, and she is thus connected to the power of chaos. But there's a curious thing about Slavic paganism, is that in Slavic paganism, fire and water have two very particular roles. And fire is seen as symbolizing order, and water is seen as symbolizing chaos, which in a lot of cultures, it's the reverse, that usually water is seen as the positive one and fire the negative one. Mokoshnika is the goddess of the home, the hearth, family, and marriage, a patroness of weaving, and protects children during childbirth. She's also the goddess of herbalism. The common people worship her by making shrines out of stones shaped like breasts. Marzana, the winter goddess Marzana, is associated with fertility rites, death, birth, and dreams. She's venerated throughout pagan Poland, and in most villages that have not converted, there will be an idol of her alongside her sisters, Yavanna, the goddess of spring. They're celebrated together in a festival at the start of spring. When Mieszko converted to Christianity, he ordered that in all the villages converted to the true faith, the twin idols should be cast into the water, symbolically drowned in the chaos from whence they came. And now in those Christian villages, the start of spring is celebrated by creating mock idols and casting them into the water again. Her name, Marzana, is derived from the Polish word meaning dream. She was said to curse those who did not venerate her by striking them with illness. Some magicians devoted to Marzana are pagan magicians devoted to Marzana are called Mora. They have the ability, said to be granted by the goddess, to separate their spirit from their body during sleep. They can then fly through the world looking like thin hair-like wisps in the dark and might be mistaken for moths. In this way, the Mora can observe things in secret. They can travel to anywhere that is not a sanctified Christian church or place protected by defensive magic. They cannot be harmed in this form, though they could be dispelled by banishing magic. So stuff like that. That's what you get in terms of details on the pagans. Overkill Joe says, any chance of additional notable NPCs in future supplements? Do you mean like supplements, like sort of like what I did with heroes and villains? Well, okay, so the problem with this is that there's very little historical resources for Poland in this period, as in chronicles, right? Like we don't even have the names of most of the people of Mieszko's court. We know a few of them, of course, like Gerald, for example, but a lot of them are lost. We know a lot of, the ones we know are usually like guys who are bishops or dudes that were very important in the main part of the court, and sometimes local rulers in certain other places, I mean, there's literally there are family members of the royal family that we're not sure about, like that we don't know what their names were. So I wouldn't be able to do something like Heroes and Villains of the Silk Road, which are like authentic historical biographies of people. But one of the things I might do, for example, in 101 Sarmatians, is create a number of NPCs that kind of fit the mold of what the different clans are like. Because one of the things about the different Polish clans is that they have their own, the Slacha, they have their own reputation. And especially in the medieval, like the earliest medieval books that talk about the Polish clans, which are usually about late 12th, early 13th century, are like the earliest of these that they're recorded. They always have, they have like really interesting commentary on, like, some of them are like, let me give you an example here. So like a lot of them will tell you the origin of the clan, or they'll tell you the region the clan was from, but then there's quite a few of them that tell you what they like some detail about them, and they're often not flattering details either, right? So like let me see, the Labich clan, which is based in the area between Krakow and Sandomierz. Their clans are mostly pagan at this time. They're known to be peace-loving but resistant to outside authorities, okay? Leliwa. This house is based in the Thorn Lands in the area south and east of Krakow in the Vistula region. Members of this house are found in other areas of the Vistula region as far north as Sandomierz. The members of this house have a reputation for being prudent to the point of caution and highly disciplined. Let me see if I can find one. There are some that are a lot funnier than this. Let's see here. Zheniava. This house is based in the border area of Greater Poland and Silesia between Poznan, Wrocław, and Kalisz. The symbol is a swirl representing a river, originally the River Warta. The men of this house have a reputation for being gruff, disliking fine arts like music, but loving hunting and dogs. It's like that tells you something about this house, right? And I didn't just invent that. That comes from one of the medieval sources about that house, right? So I'm thinking that 101 Sarmatians. Well, I guess I'm going to have 101 Sarmatians in the book if I'm going to call it that, right? So what I'll probably do is try to create figures that possibly come out of later parts of history and other elements of legends and stories and things like that, and associate them with these different Slacha clans to provide you with the type of NPCs that you might want. Durander says, previously you mentioned that when paladins encroached on the cleric's niche in Baptism of Fire, how did you design the Holy Warrior, Holy Man differently to preserve their niches? Well, I don't have paladins in the in Lion and Dragon or Baptism of Fire, obviously. But that's the problem, is that in original D&D, what you have is the cleric, and the cleric is clearly meant to be a militant warrior who also has religious powers. And so he prays to God, and he does that. He makes magic, and he's called a cleric, but there's no indication that he's really involved in a priesthood, right? Because he's just wandering around killing monsters and praying to God in old D&D, right? Later on, they actually call him a priest in certain places and things like that. But then you also get the paladin, who is also a highly religious figure, who also gets spiritual powers because of that faith, so it's kind of a repetition. It doesn't make sense to me. It just doesn't make sense to me. So with the what I do now with the Holy Warrior and the Holy Man is something that makes sense. The Holy Warrior is not a cleric. He's not. Although in theory you could have, like, if you use the Holy Warrior in Sword and Caravan or in Dark Albion, he could be a member of a knightly order, right? So like the Templars or the Hospitallers, or, well, I guess the Teutonic Knights, where he would take religious vows as a knight, right? But in principle, he doesn't have to even be that. He is a fanatically devout religious knight. Okay, so he is a knight that fights, and he gets miracles that usually have to do with fighting. The cleric, the holy man, on the other hand, is either a lay preacher, a monk, or a priest, right? So he is the religious figure and the religious man who is not good at fighting. or he might be, but he's not very good anyways. He's not trained to fight. So that is what creates the difference. Steambub says there's a comment about some Slavic legend that became such a legend that no one believed it existed and couldn't be seen. So he went and said, screw it, I'm going to be more legendary. I don't know what that's about. Sorry. Adino Yesnai says, so for a campaign to entice my players, maybe a small group of monster hunters defending remote villages and going into wildlands. Yeah, that's certainly one possibility. Another possibility is you could be traveling into the Wilderlands in the protection of a holy man who is trying to convert the heathen, though that's a bit trickier. You can certainly have if you have one or more nobles in your group, you could have a game that involves a lot of the politics of the nobility, because remember the PS court is not very centralized, right? Though there is a king after 1024, they don't have absolute power everywhere, right? There is another possibility though. You could be agents of the king, and after the 1020s or so, or the late 10 teens, I forget which one, but during the time of Boleslav the Brave, you have the PS create an office that is entrusted to enforce the rules of the monarch in the lands, and that order is called the Beaver Masters, which is just a great name, right? So you could play a group of characters that are accompanying a Beaver Master setting out to stop people who are breaking the laws that the king has demanded to do, right? They were called Beaver Masters because originally it was a group of guys that were set up by Boleslav to stop poachers from killing beavers, because there was a massive overhunting of beavers happening, and apparently it was a bit of an ecological disaster or something, or it's worrying enough to the point that Boleslav declared that this was now forbidden, and he created a group of wardens basically to enforce that. But very quickly he expanded that role to be that they were the enforcers of all the whatever laws and decrees he made, right? So they had his authority to enforce his law in the lands that he ruled, right? But they were still known as the Beaver Masters. You know? So you could be a group of Beaver Masters. You could be a group of warriors, a company of fighters in the service of a clan, or you could be people who are engaging in a military campaign against the pagans, or against the Germans, or against the Bohemians, or against the Kiev Rus. Lots of options there of who you want to be in with, you know. So there's lots of different campaigns you can choose to run. It kind of depends on what your players like and what kind of characters they make. Overkill Joe says, what am I sipping on? That's iced coffee. I should get another pipe at this point. Just a sec here. 6. Let's get the big guy. All right. Where were we here? My name says, it seems odd that there's so little verified history for this period. Well, that tells you how close it is to the Dark Ages, really, right? Like, it was there isn't a lot of history for a lot of Europe in this time, you know. There's more so obviously in Western Europe, but Eastern Europe was especially barbaric at this time, you know, and it was just coming out of that. It was just joining the rest of the world. That was one of the reasons why Mieszko wanted to become part of the Christian world, right? Is the network of both information and trade that would offer Poland was hugely enticing, you know. Oda Manjiro points out that, yes, a lot of Norse history is really fuzzy unless you uncritically accept the sagas. Yeah, exactly. There's historical details are very sparse until the latter part of the 11th century at the earliest. Starlaw says, this is so cool. Would love to see a sci-fi role-playing game with the system and campaign in one book like this in the future. Well, I don't have one with the system and the campaign, but in Spectre Press, I have published Star Adventurer, which is a complete space opera game that uses the same core rule set as this game does, Starlord. Just in case as that you don't know about that, check out Star Adventurer by the RPG Pundit. It's published by Spectre Press and it's available on DrivethruRPG. It's a very popular game. It's a very thin game. It's only like 30 some pages, but it's pretty complete and it only costs about $9.99, I think. So it's a very good deal. I mean, $9.99 in print, so I don't remember what it is in, what it is to buy on PDF, but I mean, if, at $9.99, you might as well buy it in print, right? How much is that anyway? I'm trying to remember. Let me check it out here. There it is. Star Adventure. So $3.99 PDF, $9.99 in print. But that's a great price. Alexander says, "Good morning. Will the stream be saved on the channel?" Well, I hope so. I usually make it be saved on the channel, but I've been very clumsy tonight, so I don't know if this will work or not, but I hope it will. If you haven't already, check out Baptism of Fire. Roy Goodman says, "Baptism of Fire purchase." Thank you very much, Roy. Would the beaver masters also bait the people attempting to hunt beavers? Quite possibly. Yeah. They had a very important, the beaver masters had a very important role in early Slavic culture. Similar to that of certain other, I believe that it was was it the Franks that had as their culture the bikini inspectors? I think so. And of course, the Swiss had the cheese wardens. Maxwell Boserman says, "Pundit, when making a TTRPG, is it a good idea to focus on making a setting first or mechanics?" So, in my opinion, I mean, it kind of depends. But if you want a set of mechanics that will meld really well with a setting, you need to have that setting known first so you can then integrate the mechanics into it. So the L&D setting, which is basically the setting I use in all of my OSR games now, I've used it for modern, like in the Invisible College, for space opera like Star Adventurer. And I've used it on 3 very different medieval settings. They're all medieval settings, but they're different. And so in one sense, it's a generic setting. It's an OSR setting, right? It's an OSR system, sorry. It's an OSR system. But in a different sense, what I've done with each one in its particular area is adapted it to fit that setting and that locality, right? So, for the core of a system can be generic, but you then have to have it be able to modulate to fit the setting in particular. Jeff Adamo says, "I could really go for some Black Cavendish." I'm not a huge fan of Black Cavendish. I was when I started smoking pipes, but then I lost all my sweet tooth. Steambob says, "I want more corncob pipes to smoke at least twice a day." Well, corncob pipes are really cheap. Go onto the Missouri Meerschaum site. I think they're like $7 to $12 a pop. And those are the best corncob pipes also. This is not in any way sponsored in any way, nor am I recommending that anyone do anything with those pipes other than own them. My name says, "Rough start, but you've been doing fine now for 2 hours." Yeah. My name says, "What the Franks have?" No, I'm kidding about the Franks. They didn't have bikini inspectors, but the Beaver Masters were real. They really did exist. I'm not kidding. All right, I think that we're getting to the point where we're starting to wind down here, although we still have just as many people as when we started. But I want to, do you have any other questions to ask about Baptism of Fire? Anything else you'd like to know? Nothing? Okay. Well, I guess I've covered it then. So be sure to check it out. It's on DrivethruRPG, Baptism of Fire. You can get it in PDF, soft cover or hardcover, premium or standard color. Be sure to check out all the other products by Mad Scribe, including the Sword and Caravan series, and you can now get that, as I mentioned, in a bundle. You can get all 4 Sword and Caravan books for just $88. Check out RPG Pundit. Check out the Pundit Files on the Red Room. We're now up to issue 11. So there are 11 different Pundit Files now that you can pick up. Each one is available for the low price of about $3.50. Okay, so for $3.50, you can get yourself an issue of the Pundit Files, and they're really good. Oda Manjiro says, do you intend to make a Song China game someday? I do still have the notion of doing so. Yeah, I would still like to do that. I mean, if I do end up doing a Chinese setting, it's going to be Song Dynasty, because they're my favorite dynasty by far. They're the most interesting one to play, basically. My name says your live streams are the best. Seriously, well, I appreciate it. It's mostly just me talking, unless I have a guest, but I'm glad that you enjoy them. I have a lot less production value than, say, Double D or Black Lodge or those guys, but history, gaming, random bits of info. What more could you ask for? Beaver Masters. Surly Unicorn says, I dozed off. Relaxing stream meets tired man. Oh, well. I won't take that as a comment on my capacity as a lecturer, Surly. Thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you, Cal, for being here to moderate. I appreciate that. And yeah, check out all my products. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed to this channel. A little bit of news is that we were going to do inappropriate characters this Sunday, but we've had a couple of complications. One of which is that one of the other inappropriate characters has been banned from YouTube for reasons nobody can understand. And the other inappropriate character is on obligatory wife-forced vacation. So it looks like we're not going to be doing, very sadly, we're not going to be doing a Cinco de Mayo inappropriate characters episode. It's really a pity. We were planning on inviting the basic expert there, but no luck. Oh well. But we'll be back 2 weeks after this, so on the 19th, I guess it'll be. But we're not going to be back here. We're going to be coming back on Rumble and Twitter. So as not to specifically to avoid any impression. We're not going to have him. We're not going to keep doing it on YouTube because we don't want to have the accusation that it's somehow a way for him to get around a ban, right? So unfortunately, we're going to have to be able to do it elsewhere, but we're going to be simulcasting it. It'll still be a live stream. It'll still be on Rumble and on Twitter. Okay. So you'll have to check it out. Well, X. You'll have to check it out there. And okay, I guess that's about it for today. Check out all my stuff. Thank you again to everybody, and that's a lot of everybody's at this point, who have purchased Baptism of Fire. And I'm really glad that people are loving it. Oh yeah, one more thing, one very important thing. If you can, I know you have to wait 24 hours for this, right? But once you've bought Baptism of Fire, and if you like it, please go back to the drive-through page and just give it a rating. I don't think that takes very long. I mean, if you want to write a review, go right ahead. But at the very least, the ratings are going to be of help to us. So if you want to just do us that little favor, just go there, click the 5 stars if you feel it's 5 stars, and that'll be of great benefit to us. So please do. All right. I guess that's pretty much everything for now. Oh, wait, one more thing. I almost forgot. I wish Chris had reminded me of this. We have a couple of little bits of surprises for people who are already fans of Baptism of Fire. And I'm trying to see now if I can find it. I should have, damn it, I should have done this when he was still here. Oh, okay. Yeah, it is here. So there is a link already. It's in, if you go to Mad Scribe Games on DriveThru, you will find that you can now get the map. If you've seen Baptism of Fire, you know that there's a fantastic map of fantasy Poland, of 11th century Poland in the book, right? And a lot of people wanted to know if they could get that map as a separate file. Well, guess what? Mad Scribe is doing that. It is pay what you want. So, you know, you can support us by sending us some bucks for the map, or you can download it without doing that, right? And it is a, I mean, if you've seen it, it is a fantastic map. So go check it out, download it, send us a buck or two if you feel like it. You're not going to be disappointed. Second, I know that Chris is working on a form fillable character sheet for Baptism of Fire, but there's some problems with with figuring out how to make it work on DriveThru. So there is still, some of you have asked for a form fillable character sheet. It's probably going to get there. Okay, so be sure to be on the lookout for that. Meanwhile, you can now get the map, and it is a beautiful map, right? I helped make sure that some of the geography was there, but otherwise it's all Chris Miller's work, of course, and he is to be lauded for it. Surly Unicorn says, I made a Rumble account specifically to support Ryan and Kyle, so I'll be there. Good. Oda Manjiro says there's a wandering Chinese wuxia genre supplement of pundits now. I think what you're referring to there is in the Pundit Files. It's that is Pundit Files issue 4, I think. No, issue 3, Martial Artists of the Song Dynasty. Yeah, where I create a fighting martial artist class for Sword and Caravan, basically. It's a Song Dynasty martial artist. All right. Thank you to everyone. I really appreciate it. Looks like we're just about done now. Yeah, okay. So check out the Pundit Files on the Red Room, the Baptism of Fire on DriveThru, and the Sword and Caravan bundle. And if you want to, you can now get the Baptism of Fire map as a separate file. I guess that's it for today. Thank you very much. Currently smoking Peterson oversized poker plus Argento roots. Take care, everyone.